Every time I've posted a video recently talking about high elves, especially if we're looking in the Chracian Detachment, I found people telling me that the best thing since sliced bread are the Chracian Woodsmen. And I'm going to talk about why I think they're a little bit overrated. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that I think that they're bad. I've used them. I will continue to use them. I think they're one of the better parts of the detachment. But a lot of people are talking about them as if they're the best thing since sliced bread. So I want to talk about some of the limitations of the unit, what issues you might have, maybe how you can overcome those, and let's go from there. But first, let's look at what's good about the unit so we know what we're building on. So looking at the unit, it does start off in a good place. Stat line wise, they're very similar to the White Lions, but there are some downsides. So if we start off, we can see that they've got weapon skill 4 instead of weapon skill 5. Otherwise, the stat line is exactly the same. They come in at 12 points and they're equipped with the Great Blades and Light Armor. All good so far. You can take them as this, although I think I would recommend putting upgrades on them. I find them a lot more effective when you put just a few more points into each model. You can give them warbows. This one I think is good, but honestly, I need to do more testing. Maybe you leave the warbows, as weird as that sounds. I'm going to be taking the heavy armor every time. 1 point to take my unit from a 6 up to a 5 up seems like a no-brainer to me. And then the same with the Lion Cloak, protecting me against non-magical shooting. This one is a little bit of a meta read because if you're playing a meta where people only kill your stuff at range with Ruby Ring of Ruin, Fireball, Pillar of Fire, these sorts of spells, you're not going to get much use out of it. But if you find that people run incidental firepower, Empire Archers, if they're playing dwarves with, I don't know, Iron Drakes, Rangers, their own shooting, you're probably going to find some more value out of this. You'll also find that they come with a good suite of special rules as well. Elven Reflex is probably not going to do much for you here, given that you've got great weapons, but if you're charging, it can take you to Initiative 5 if you're fighting something like Chaos Warriors with Initiative 4. Move through cover, obviously a great rule, especially if you're going to be bringing your own bit of terrain, although what shape that terrain takes can be debated. I'd like to see some clarification on that one. Valor of Ages, just a standard elf rule there. All of your elves get it. And Vanguard as well. Vanguard's really nice. That's something that you don't see on most units. And that's one of the things that are going to help push this forwards. And then you've got the ability to upgrade not to one unit with scouts or ambushes instead, which is quite nice. I feel like this could have been 0 to 1 per 1,000 without any issues, and I'm not really sure why I didn't go that way. But, you know, fair enough. It is what it is. But then if you compare them to White Lions, you'll see that actually they're not that impressive in comparison. So points-wise, a White Lion is 14 points, and you're like, okay, sure. But that's the equivalent points of the Chracian Woodsman with heavy armor and the Lion Cloak. So if you leave the Warbow, you're at the same points. And what do you get over that? Well, you get skirmish over that, and that's it. But you lose a pip of weapon skill, and being weapon skill 5 is quite nice when you're a relatively squishy unit that wants to be hitting hard. If you're going to be hitting on 4s instead of 3s, sometimes that's going to make a big difference. You're going to end up not killing the thing that you need to. You're going to lose attacks back in. But overall, not a poor stat line. They are elves after all, so it's difficult to say that you're going to be doing poorly with them. Both the Chracian Woodsmen and the White Lions can take full command. Weirdly, you're paying a point per model more for the full command in the Chracian Woodsman. Not really sure why that is, going from 6 to 7 points. But you know, that's not a real difference. 3 points across the army is not going to make a huge issue there. But what you do lose out on is the ability to take magic banners and magic items on your unit. One of the really good items that's come in the new Arcane Journal is the Ring of Fury. And if you've got a melee unit that needs a little bit more punch, the ability to put 2d3 Strength 4 AP2 hits into a unit that you charge is really quite valuable, and you'll find that I think a lot of people are going to be using it. Silver Helms are a really good place to put this. Maybe putting cheap units with magic items on is going to be a little bit too pricey, points per model, so you wouldn't have done this anyway, but having the option there would have been nice. Obviously, there's defensive items that you could have been putting on or similar, and not being able to take a magic banner as well, I think, is a little bit of a shame, because there are some ones that are worth taking. Finally, when we compare the two units, we see the first rules difference that is, in my opinion, an actual downside for the Chracian Woodsmen. And this might sound a little bit weird, but I'll explain what I mean. And that is that Chracian Woodsmen are skirmishers. Skirmishers are a good rule, but they don't have an option to be open order, whereas the White Lions obviously come default with open order, and they don't have the option to be skirmishers. If Chracian Woodsmen had the option to be open order, I think this unit would be incredible. I would be taking them purely in the Chracian Detachment, I wouldn't be running White Lions at all. However, I think the downside of not being able to take them in open order at all and being limited to skirmish is a real problem that is going to hinder them. This might sound weird. You think of skirmish units and you think, oh, these are the ones that are really difficult to deal with. They're really slippery. It's hard for me to catch them. They're able to charge in any direction. It's hard for me to escape them. This is all true. If we're thinking about things like Pegasus Knights, incredible stuff. But that goes hand in hand with having a good movement. And the problem with that is there was a change to the FAQ probably about 8 months ago now, where if you're a skirmishing unit and you can't move into combat, if you're charged and you can't rank up, so you've got one movement's worth of movement to move from where you were stood to get into ranking, or when you charge, if you haven't got enough movement to rank up correctly, you do end up losing your models, which is a huge downside and something that I've been experiencing when I've been playing these models. Now, obviously, you are a movement 5 model, so if you're being charged, I'm not really too worried about this. Chances are you're going to be able to move your models so that you're going to get into a ranked up formation with a 5-inch movement. That's not really a problem. What is a problem to me is when you're making the charge, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, you're a move 5 model with no swift stride. Obviously, having swift stride on these would be nuts. I'm not advocating to give infantry swift stride. We've already got enough fast stuff in the game. Let's slow it down a little bit. But what that means is if you're in any way strung out, if you're not clumped up in a circle, you might find that you're going to find it difficult to get into base to base with your opponent with the back models. And this is something that I've been experiencing. The reason that I said earlier that I'm not 100% sure if you're going to be taking warbows, and you probably do, and maybe I'm just making too much of a thing out of this, but if you're using warbows, you're going to string out a little bit so you can get your shots in. That's just generally how it's going to go. Obviously, if you've watched the videos on the channel previously where I've been looking at Skaven or a lot of the battle reports, I will put skirmishers in a weird sort of diamond formation where the tip of the front base is poking through the sides of the 2 bases next to them. And this is the way that you can be the shortest width in a line while still getting visibility to do all of your shots. And it's a really good formation. But what it means is, end to end, if you've got a 10 model unit of Chracian Woodsmen, you're still going to be something like 7 inches long from tip to tip. And that's because you've got the inch-long bases and they are diagonal. There is ways around this in that you just lose some shots. So maybe if you're playing against armies that you're worried that you get into flanks, that you lose some shots. But I feel like part of the draw of this unit is that you've got the strength 4 warbows, which are their own thing. Maybe we talk about that down the line. So when you're charging, I've experienced, trying to charge into enemy skirmishers that have got around the flank. They've decided to hold. I've rolled poorly on my charge. I've ended up losing 6 of the 10 models, getting into combat with only 4 models. I did end up winning the fight, but when you're talking about elves, that's, 75 points if you're losing. No, it's more. It's 90 points if you're losing 6 models. And that is a lot to be losing, and you can't be consistently doing that across the army. The second part of this issue is, despite having move through cover, which is a good rule, and I do like that they have it, this doesn't benefit melee troops in the way that you want it to. Obviously, you don't lose the inch of movement off your movement characteristic when you're making the charge. This is good. However, you do still make the charge using the lowest of 2d6. And this is where it's going to really bite you in the backside, because this is the sort of unit you probably do want to be playing around terrain. Having them in woods is great. You're a skirmisher already, so if you're taking incoming shots, you're at -2, -1 for being in light cover for the wood, -1 for being a skirmisher. This is a great way to add some defense to yourself. But then you are going to be charging at lowest of 2d6, which means that a lot of the time you're going to be rolling a 2 or a 3 if you're lucky, and you're going to end up not moving as far as you want to, and that's going to lead to times when, if you're moving correctly, you're going to be losing models. And this is something, if you're playing against someone who's playing a lot of skirmishing infantry, just make sure when they roll the dice that you do make sure that you are able to move each model in. It does slow the game down a little bit, but, if people roll poorly, they can lose half of their unit very easily. Now, the obvious answer to this comes in the way that people might play Wolves of the Sea. Wolves of the Sea, you might take the Berserks, which is a T4 unit, hits very hard. It's the equivalent here. You've got Marauders, but the Marauders are skirmish. They hit a little bit harder. They're a little bit tankier. They're a great unit. And people are running these typically in units of 5 or maybe 6, which is all well and good. Here's the problem. If we're talking about playing this army, a lot of places have adopted a rule of 3. Some places have adopted a rule of 6, either or. And that means that you're going to struggle to fill up your units in the way that you might want to, because if we're looking at the Wolves of the Sea, people are taking MSU units. They're taking units of 5, they're taking units of 6 models. They might be pairing them with stuff like ambush on each unit, so you've got the flexibility to put them where you need to. You can't really do that in this detachment, because if you're taking units of 5 or 6, you're going to come up against the rule of 3 or rule of 6 rule that a lot of tournaments or even play groups have adopted as a basic rule. Now, if you're not using the rule of 3, if you can just run as many units as you want in, your detachment, you're just limited by whatever is in the actual text in the book. Fair play. I think that takes away a lot of the issues that this army has. But if you can only take 3 units of the Chracian Woodsmen, you come up against a real problem, because you've got to spend 33% of your points on core. And that means 660 points. Assuming that we take the fully upgraded Woodsman, in that we give them the heavy armor, the bow, and the Lion's Cloak. Probably don't bother with command. Maybe we'd go with musicians. I'm not sure if I would bother. But let's say we go with those. If we do that, you need 44 models to fill up your core, which doesn't sound like too much, but if you're going with units of, let's say, 6 models, 3 units of 6 is 18. Where are we going to put the points for the rest of the models? One last limitation that I just want to discuss, that Wolves of the Sea, the other army that has a very sort of similar loadout to these units, doesn't have, that this detachment does have, is Wolves of the Sea doesn't really care about how many drops they have. In fact, the opposite. They want more drops. The more drops, the better, because they can out-deploy their opponent, and they're not punished for it in terms of who has the +1 to go first or go second. Because Wolves of the Sea have a rule where they get to challenge with one of their unit champions against one of your unit champions, and if they win, which they're probably going to, because they're going to specifically buff up one of their unit champions to make sure they have the advantage in the fight, they just get to go first. No roll-off. They just go. Wood Elves don't have that. High Elves don't have that, I should say. And the problem with High Elves not having that is, if you're looking at these smaller units of Chracian Woodsmen, even if outside of rule of 3, rule of 6, you can just take as many as you want. If you can just take 8 units of 6, for example, or 8 units of 5, that's great, but you're going to find that you're going second. And while they are a little bit resistant to shooting, they're not resistant to magical shooting. So some armies aren't going to be able to pick them up from across the board. And that's a problem that you're going to have to deal with. And going second more often than not is, I think, a little bit of an issue for this army. Why do I think going second is an issue for this army? Well, they're still T3 elves. I know there's resistances here. A 4-up armor save and -1 to be hit from ballistic skill shooting because they're skirmish. That's good. But as I said, if you're being hit with Ruby Rings of Ruins and Fireballs and Pillar of Fire, that's not going to be the thing to save you. And if you're paying 15 points a model, that's very expensive. So in my eyes, you want to limit the amount of damage coming at you, and you want to be on the front foot. You want to be going first as much as possible. Now, this does depend how you build the rest of the list. Maybe you find that you've put enough stuff in the army that the Woodsmen are not the thing that ends up being shot at. But I think it is a little bit limiting in terms of what you can bring. So in my eyes, you probably want to go limit the drops a little bit. You don't want to go too heavy, but you are going to find that you're heavier than some armies just because you've got a lot of these small skirmishing units. Now, this might feel like an unfair criticism of the unit, but I will say the only place that we can take this unit, the Chracian Woodsman, is inside the Chracian Warhost detachment, and I think that really does limit the usability of them to an extent. And I want to be clear, I think I've made it obvious that when I've been talking about them, I like this unit. I think it's a good unit. They're the elf version of Dwarf Rangers. You can upgrade them. They hit hard in melee. They're pretty resistant to shooting. If you charge them, they are going to take a bit of punishment, but they've got great weapons, and all of this is good stuff. They don't have open order in the way that Rangers have, which makes me immediately a lot less excited about them, although you can spam them more than you can spam the Rangers. I think they're a good unit, but I just think that there's something that you use in moderation. And when I'm seeing people say the only thing that I'm going to be running is the Woodsman, or the only unit worth running is Woodsman, the only good thing about this detachment is Woodsman, I don't agree. And I think they do have to be used in combination with other units, which realistically, in my eyes, is probably going to be the basic White Lions. So how would I build my core slot for the Chracian Detachment? And this is very basic. This is not, fleshed out. You can look at putting magic banners on things. You can look at putting magic items on them as well. Um, I'm actually a big fan of a big block of 20 with the +1 toughness banner, but that requires you to put a battle standard bearer in there as well. So, this comes down to personal mileage. If you're wanting to play, the just more independent units, I think something like this is probably how I'd go. So models of 8 Woodsmen is maybe a little bit on the higher end of what I'm comfortable with, but it's probably not too bad. I probably wouldn't want to go much higher than this, and it does give you protection against panic. Obviously, multiples of 4 are very strong. Just in terms of you need to take 3 models before you take a panic test. You have to be down to a single model before your opponent scores any points for it. Just a good number to go for, especially when you're talking about skirmish models. And I've given them the full upgrades there. So the heavy armor, the warbows, and the lion cloaks. One of them's got scouts as well. It's a free upgrade. Probably feels worthwhile. You don't have to use it. You do lose the veteran for it, but having the flexibility there if your opponent has a lot of scouts is quite nice. Or if you find that you need to buy space, there are a lot of times where you might sacrifice that +1 because having the scouting units is quite valuable. And then also you've got the white lions as well. I've just gone for 2 units of 10. The important thing here is that you need about 20 models to get to that. I'm a little leery of putting banners in them because it means that you are able to pick up those points quite easily. But this is the sort of core detachment where you might pair it with a dark magic caster. So the Stormweaver makes these very effective. If you're getting the charge off, you're going to be, hitting them with Battle Lust, giving them +1 attack, and also giving them the rerolls to hit from Frenzy. Not from Frenzy. +1 attack from Frenzy, reroll hits from Hatred. And this does overcome some of the issues that the Chracian Woodsmen do have in terms of having a worse weapon skill as well. So I think something like this is maybe where I would start for core, unless you wanted to go for that big sort of Death Star unit where you're going to layer defensive items on top of them. Maybe look at the Lawmaster's Cloak. Maybe look at giving them the BSB for +1 toughness. All of those good things there. So, with all that said, do I think the Chracian Woodsmen are terrible? Of course I don't. I think they're good. I think they're really solid. They are, I think I alluded to earlier, they're the dwarf rangers of high elves. They're a really solid unit. They just have some limitations that concern me, and the way that I'm running the units has to be changed to reflect that. And I think the problem that comes in is most places playing rule of 3 or rule of 6 does limit how you can bring them. If you're doing rule of 6 for core, where you can take 6 units of the same name, I think you probably are pretty much okay. You could run, I think it comes out to something like 4 units of 6 and 2 units of 7, and that gets you to your 44 without any issues. Again, 8 is a little bit high, but probably not the end of the world. Just find that if you're going to be threatening to charge next turn, you might want to clump up a little bit and maybe lose some shots with the warbows. So that's all well and good. But yeah, I like them. I just think they're maybe not the only good thing that you want to run in the detachment. And I would recommend looking at the white lions as well. Being able to take white lions as core is very good, in my opinion. And just think about how you want to run them, whether you want to buff them up in terms of making them harder to remove, give them a little bit more hitting power as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.